Before we step into the story tonight, I invite you to settle into stillness. Find a position that feels comfortable, perhaps lying down, your head resting against the pillow, your arms at ease by your sides. Close your eyes if you wish. Let the light in your room grow softer, or imagine it dimming into a warm glow. Feel the weight of your body sinking gently into the mattress beneath you, each point of contact supported, cradled. There is no rush now, no demands, only the slow rhythm of your breath and the gentle unfolding of this journey. Take a deep, slow inhale. Feel the cool air entering your nose, filling your lungs. Pause for a heartbeat. And then exhale, letting all the tension you've carried today drift away. Again, breathe in as though you are drawing in peace itself, and breathe out, releasing the rest of the world. We are about to travel far, not in distance but in time. Our steps will take us down a path into a valley so quiet, so untouched, that the air itself feels older than memory. In your mind's eye, see the evening sky above, a muted blue fading into silver, clouds stretched thin across the horizon. A faint breeze moves through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and rain. Ahead, the land slopes downward, leading us into the Valley of Silence. There are no cars here, no distant hum of cities, only the soft crunch of your footsteps on the trail and the quiet murmur of leaves shifting in the wind. The valley feels timeless. You can sense it even before you see the entrance to the cave. These cliffs, worn smooth by centuries of wind and water, have stood in the same place for tens of thousands of years. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of those who walked here long before us, people whose lives have faded into history, yet whose voices remain in the shapes they left behind. We follow the path deeper into the valley. Shadows stretch across the stones as the sun sinks lower, each step taking us further from the present. Birdsong becomes softer, rarer, until at last there is only silence. A silence so complete that you can hear your own breath with startling clarity. And then ahead, in the side of the cliff, we see it, a dark opening, half hidden behind a curtain of ivy and stone. The mouth of the cave is wide enough for a person to pass, but it feels more like a threshold than an entrance, as though the air inside belongs to another world. A cool draught flows out, brushing against your skin, carrying a faint scent of damp stone and something older, something untouched. The moment you stand before it, you know, beyond this shadowed arch lies a place where time has folded in on itself, preserving the marks of hands that have not moved for over 30,000 years. We stand there for a moment, breathing in the chill. The daylight fades at our backs, and in the cave's breath we feel the weight of its age. It's not a heavy weight, more like the quiet gravity of a story waiting to be told. When we step forward, our eyes begin to adjust to the dim light. The walls glisten faintly with moisture, the ground smooth underfoot. Shadows ripple where the light of our torch falls, bending around the curves of the stone. Every sound, the faint drip of water, the whisper of fabric as we move, echoes softly, as if the cave itself is listening. And then, deeper still, we begin to see them. Not clearly at first, just faint outlines, dark shapes on pale stone. But as we lift the light, they sharpen into forms, a curve of a horse's neck, the sweep of its mane, the powerful arc of its back. These are not modern sketches, not art made for decoration. They are messages, memories, dreams, left by people whose world was cold, vast and untamed, yet who found beauty in the life that moved across it. The torchlight dances across the walls, and more figures emerge, bison with heavy shoulders and lowered heads, lions with lean bodies and eyes that seem to follow you, mammoths stepping forward in silence. Their lines are sure and deliberate, drawn with hands that understood every muscle and motion of the animals they portrayed. You can almost imagine them alive, moving in the flicker of firelight, their shadows merging with the shadows of the real creatures outside. We stand in stillness, absorbing the scene. The air is cool, almost cold, but not unwelcoming. It feels like the cave is holding its breath, waiting for us to listen. Somewhere far above us, the night has settled over the valley. The stars wheel slowly through the sky, unseen, while here inside, another kind of constellation surrounds us, not of light, but of lines and shapes, each one holding a fragment of a lifelong gone. We will not rush through this place. We will walk slowly, our torch moving across each image, letting the quiet seep into us. We will listen for the faintest whispers, the voices carried forward through time by charcoal lines and ochre strokes. And as we move deeper into the cave, we will begin to understand this is not just a gallery of paintings. It is a living memory, and tonight it has opened its doors to us. The air inside the cave is different now, not because it has changed, but because we have stepped further into its story. The light from outside has long faded, replaced entirely by the warm glow of the torch in your hand. Its flame bends and sways gently, throwing shadows across the rock, shadows that seem almost alive, stretching and shrinking as you move. The walls here are not flat. They ripple and curve, as though the earth itself once moved in slow waves and then froze in place. Those ancient artists understood this. They saw not just a surface to draw upon, but a shape to work with, letting the contours of the stone become the muscles of a running horse, the slope of a bison's shoulder, the thrust of a mammoth's tusk. Light plays along these shapes just as it did tens of thousands of years ago, turning still figures into moving visions. When you walk slowly, the animals seem to shift position. The mammoth's head dips forward. The horse's legs lift as if in mid-stride. The bison lowers its horns in quiet warning. It is not magic, and yet it feels like it. The flicker of the flame is enough to breathe motion into stone. We move deeper, and the shadows deepen with us. Some of the paintings are faint, worn by the touch of time and air, while others are startlingly clear, black charcoal lines and red ochre still clinging to the rock as though the artist had stepped away only hours ago. You imagine that moment, a hand, steady and deliberate, tracing the curve of a horn, a mind holding both the memory of the animal and the shape of the stone in perfect harmony. Here in the torchlight you can almost feel the presence of that artist, standing exactly where you stand now, looking at the same wall, seeing the same shapes emerge. The sound in the cave is strange. Every step you take sends out a soft echo, returning from somewhere unseen. If you pause, the silence wraps around you, not empty, but full of the faint hum of the earth itself. Somewhere water drips at regular intervals, marking time in its own patient rhythm. We come to a section of the wall where the images are layered, one over another. A mammoth stands behind a lion, its tusks barely visible through the faint outline of the big cat's body. Next to it, the hindquarters of a horse overlap with the head of a bison. It is as if each new painting did not erase the old, but joined it a conversation carried out over generations, the walls becoming a living record of encounters, hunts, and visions. You notice that some figures are not whole. A horse without a head, a bison with only the front half drawn. It might seem incomplete to us, but perhaps the artist saw no need for the rest. Perhaps the missing parts were supplied by the mind of the viewer, by the way the shadows moved, by the stories told in firelight. The torchlight catches on a section of the wall where the rock bulges outward. Here the shape has been used perfectly, a bison's shoulder and hump following the curve of the stone, the line of its back arching naturally into the rock's surface. The eye is just a small dark dot, but it holds an expression both fierce and calm, as if it has accepted its place in both life and art. As we stand before it, you feel time dissolve a little more. There is no today here, only the now of this moment, and the now of the moment when that eye was painted, and somehow they are the same. We move again, the shadows shifting, the animals turning their heads as if to watch us pass. The floor beneath us is uneven, worn smooth in places, jagged in others. Once, perhaps, feet like ours walked this same path, but barefoot, the skin touching stone, the body carrying fire deeper into darkness. Our own shadows join those on the wall, merging with the painted creatures. For an instant, in the flicker of the torch, your outline and that of the bison's head blend together, as if you are part of the same story. And maybe you are. Maybe all who walk here, past and present, become part of the cave's memory. The further we go, the more the torchlight feels like a fragile thread binding us to the outside world. Around us, the shadows shift and fold. They are not frightening, but they are powerful, reminders that in darkness the mind sees more than the eyes do. Somewhere ahead, the cave bends. We cannot yet see what waits around that corner, but the air feels cooler, the sound of dripping water louder. The shadows on the wall lean forward, as though guiding us onward. We take another step, and the light follows. And with it, the animals begin to move again. The moment you step beyond the threshold of the cave, the light behind you begins to fade. At first it's a gentle dimming, the greens of the valley, the soft shapes of trees and vines, they're still visible when you glance back. But with every step forward, they retreat into a narrowing frame, and the shadows ahead swell to meet you. The transition is not abrupt but gradual, like slipping into cool water after standing in the sun. Your eyes strain to adjust, picking out the shapes of uneven stone, slick patches where droplets have condensed over centuries, and shallow pools that glisten faintly under the faint spill of daylight still reaching from the entrance. The temperature drops almost immediately. Outside, the air had been warm and carrying the scents of grass and soil. Inside, the cave breathes a constant chill, steady, unchanging, almost ancient in its patience. You feel it settle on your skin, a coolness that seems to wrap around your arms and neck. It isn't unpleasant, just different. This is the climate the paintings have always known, the same cool breath that touched the artists who knelt here tens of thousands of years ago. Your footsteps, once muffled by grass and soil outside, now send soft echoes curling into the darkness. The sound seems to go farther than it should, bouncing back faintly from deeper chambers you haven't yet seen. Each footfall is accompanied by a faint crunch of gravel or the subtle slip of your boot on a smooth patch of stone. You begin to walk more carefully, aware that the ground is uneven, pocked by centuries of dripping water and shifting sediment. The smell is the next change you notice. Outside, the air was alive, filled with wind carrying pollen, the distant sweetness of wildflowers and the faint tang of sun-warmed rock. Inside, it's different. The air is still, almost heavy. It smells faintly of damp mineral and stone dust with just a trace of earth. If you breathe more deeply, there's a cool neutrality to it, as though the air itself has been resting here for ages, undisturbed except for these moments when the outside world slips in with you. Your hand brushes against the cave wall, and it feels unlike any stone you've touched in daylight. It's cool and slightly damp, but not smooth. There are ridges, hollows, and the delicate tracing of mineral veins. Some sections have a faint powdery texture, a legacy of centuries of tiny mineral deposits. It's humbling to think that every irregularity in the rock face has a history, a slow, patient story written by water, stone, and time. The light from the entrance is dimming quickly now, and shadows begin to dominate. Shapes lose their edges, colours drain to shades of grey and muted brown. You find yourself leaning on your other senses, the subtle echo of your breath, the cool air drifting past your face, the faint sound of droplets falling in the distance. They all become your guides. Each drop lands with a tiny note, a crystalline sound that seems impossibly loud in the stillness. As you move deeper, you notice how your own body becomes part of the cave's soundscape. The soft fabric of your clothes brushing with each step, the whisper of your breath, the slight shuffle of boots against stone. In this space, every sound feels magnified, each one breaking the silence like ripples on still water. You begin to move more quietly, instinctively matching the slow, unhurried rhythm of the place. The deeper you go, the more the darkness takes on a presence of its own. It is not the kind of darkness that feels hostile, but rather one that is complete, self-contained, and perfectly indifferent to your presence. Here, light is a guest, not a native. The cave existed for tens of thousands of years without it, holding its treasures in this perfect obscurity, until a human hand carried in a flicker of flame. You begin to imagine what it must have been like for the first modern explorers to stand in this same place. Without electric lamps, they would have relied on flickering torches or oil lamps, each flame struggling against the vast blackness. The light would have made shadows leap across the walls, distorting the space, making the stone seem alive. That first moment of illumination must have felt both thrilling and disorienting, revealing beauty in fragments, one wall at a time, while the rest remained hidden just beyond reach. The air grows stiller as you move forward, as though the cave has closed its doors behind you. The entrance is no longer visible when you turn around. You are fully inside now, in a place where time feels suspended. The outside world, with its sun and clouds, its shifting winds and passing hours, feels impossibly far away. Down here, the seasons do not change, the weather does not intrude, and the years pass without leaving a mark. Your eyes are beginning to adjust to the dimness, enough to pick out the contours of the tunnel ahead. The walls rise close on either side, curving like the inside of an immense rib cage. Above, the ceiling dips and rises unpredictably, sometimes forcing you to lower your head, other times opening into vaults high enough to lose in shadow. These formations are more than just geology. They are the architecture in which ancient artists worked. You imagine them moving through these same shapes, their footsteps and breathing sounding just like yours. Somewhere ahead, the faint glint of a mineral deposit catches what little light there is, and for a moment it sparkles faintly like frost. You move closer, noting how the rock has been shaped by slow drips over millennia, leaving delicate patterns that seem almost deliberate. In this dim world, such details become more vivid. You find yourself tracing their lines with your eyes, following the curves and flows as though reading a language you can't quite understand. The smell of stone grows stronger, mixed now with a faint, almost metallic tang from mineral-rich water. You pause for a moment, taking in the cool stillness. In this silence, even your breath feels loud. You imagine what it must have been like to be here without the hum of modern lights, without any sound but your own body. The cave would have been a world apart, a self-contained realm where each step forward was a journey into both space and time. Somewhere ahead, the path bends slightly, leading you deeper into shadow. You cannot yet see what waits beyond, but you feel a subtle shift in the air, perhaps the narrowing of the tunnel, or the opening into a chamber. Your heartbeat slows as though your body is matching the cave's pace. Here, there is no need to rush. Time moves differently in the dark. And so you continue forward, your senses heightened, each step carrying you further from the familiar and closer to a world that has been waiting in perfect stillness for tens of thousands of years. This is no longer simply a walk into a cave. It is an entrance into a preserved moment in human history, a threshold between the living present and the untouched past. The darkness ahead is no longer empty. As you move deeper into the cave, you can almost feel where light once danced. The walls here are not bare. They carry the memory of firelight, of shadows that lived and moved long before you arrived. You picture the first flickers, the trembling orange glow of a torch carried into the black, its flame licking and bending in the still air. The darkness would have surged and retreated with every movement of that flame, revealing fragments of wall in fleeting glimpses before swallowing them again. Torchlight is different from the steady illumination we know today. It's alive, unpredictable. It breathes with its holder's movements, swaying and trembling in the hand. Each shift of the wrist, each change in grip, sends shadows leaping. The walls would have seemed to pulse and move, shapes stretching and collapsing as the light played across the stone's uneven surface. In that trembling glow, a painted horse could appear to gallop, a lion to stalk, a mammoth to sway its massive head. The early artists understood this. They did not paint in spaces where the walls were flat and evenly lit. They worked with the stone's natural curves, ridges, and textures. They chose places where a bump could become the shoulder of a bison, where a hollow could be the dark of an eye. In firelight, these features came alive, the shifting shadows giving them motion. The art was never still. It was a performance between pigment, rock, and flame. You try to imagine standing here thousands of years ago, with only that wavering light for company. The rest of the chamber would be an ocean of blackness pressing in at the edges. The painter's companions might have sat nearby holding torches, their faces lit from below, eyes fixed on the emerging shapes. Each breath they took would feed the flame with oxygen, and their shadows would stretch monstrously up the wall. The silence would have been broken only by the soft hiss of burning resin, the occasional crack of a torch, and the quiet scratch of pigment meeting stone. Even now, the surfaces bear marks of that light. In some places, the rock is darkened as if touched by smoke centuries ago. Archaeologists have found blackened fragments of torchwood on cave floors, remnants of those brief illuminations. Some walls bear soot deposits, tiny, fragile layers that have survived in the still air for tens of thousands of years. These are not just signs of human presence. They are echoes of moments when the paintings breathed in firelight for the first time. Your eyes, though adjusted to the dim, can only guess at what it must have looked like. Electric light is constant, clinical. It reveals without drama, but in the mind's eye you can see the figures moving. Not truly animated, but touched by a kind of illusion. The same way a candle makes a still face seem to smile or frown. In that moment, the cave itself would have been part of the performance. The stone was not passive. It joined in, its curves shaping the play of light and shadow. Some researchers believe this movement was intentional, that the paintings were meant to be seen in motion, the way we might watch a film or a play. The artist's skill lay not just in the shape and colour of the figures, but in understanding how the shadows would interact with them. A line suggesting a leg might shift into a running stride when the flame passed in front of it. A pattern of dots might pulse with meaning as the light caught them, disappearing and reappearing in rhythm. It is easy to think of these caves as galleries, silent spaces for quiet contemplation, but in truth they were stages. The audience was small, the lighting dynamic, the setting intimate and enclosed. The art was experienced in layers, pigment, stone, shadow and fire, and perhaps too in sound, a chant, a murmur, the crackle of flame. You stop for a moment and stand still, imagining yourself holding that torch. You picture the warmth of it in your hand, the resin dripping down the wood, the glow radiating onto your face. You lift it toward the wall, watching how the uneven rock changes the shapes it casts. Even here, with the paintings far ahead in other chambers, you see how a simple flick of the wrist can turn an ordinary bump into something more. A moving shoulder, the flick of a tail, the suggestion of an eye. The shadows themselves feel ancient here. The ones you cast now are modern, but they fall in the same places as those of the first artists. When your silhouette stretches along the wall, you can imagine theirs overlapping it, a layering of human presence across millennia. This is how we have always interacted with the world, shaping it with light, giving form to darkness. There is something hypnotic about imagining the scene repeated again and again. Perhaps the same torch was used to light multiple painting sessions. Perhaps children were allowed inside to watch, their small gasps echoing in the chamber. Perhaps there was ritual, a particular way the flame was moved, a pattern in the illumination that signaled the moment of reveal. We may never know, but the cave seems to hold its breath around such possibilities. The further you go into this chamber, the more you notice how the stone invites the flicker. Ridges catch and release the light in unpredictable ways, creating shadows within shadows. A flat wall here would be rare. The surface is a complex geography, perfect for transforming static drawings into moving visions. The artists must have chosen these spaces with great care, walking the walls by torchlight before ever picking up pigment, deciding where movement could be born from the meeting of fire and stone. Even without the actual flames, the idea of them changes how you see the space. Every protrusion becomes a potential shoulder or flank, every hollow an eye or mouth. The light you carry now, steady and modern, feels almost intrusive. It strips away the magic of unpredictability. You find yourself wishing for a moment that you could turn it off and rely solely on fire. But with fire would come a trade, the risk of smoke, the limited vision, the ever-present threat of losing your bearings in the shifting dark. And yet, for those who painted here, that was the only way. Their art was born in shadow and flicker, in moments when the cave walls seemed alive. Perhaps that is why the images feel so timeless. They are not meant to be still. They were always moving, always caught between light and darkness. As you leave this section and prepare to go deeper, you carry that vision with you. Ahead lies the first true gallery of paintings, but already you understand that they were never just marks on stone. They were part of an experience, a conversation between artist, cave and flame, and the shadows dancing endlessly in the mind's eye are still here, waiting to move again. The air changes again as you move forward. You can sense, almost feel, the point in the cave where bare stone gives way to the marks of human intention. Here, the walls are not just natural surfaces, they have been chosen, prepared and touched. You are standing where artists once stood, carrying with them the tools and pigments that would turn rock into story. It is easy to imagine them arriving, perhaps as a small group, their footsteps soft on the packed earth. They would have come from the surface where the world was cold or warm depending on the season, where wind brushed through grass and firelight danced in the open. Their descent into the cave was deliberate, an act requiring preparation. These were not casual visitors, they had purpose. The artist's hands would have been full. In one perhaps a torch of pine resin wrapped tightly to keep the flame steady. In the other a small pouch or basket holding lumps of ochre, charcoal sticks and brushes made from animal hair or chewed twigs. Some pigments might have been carried in shells or bone cups, mixed earlier with water, fat or spit to make them bind to the stone. They had learned which substances held colour best, which surfaces drank the pigment deep, and which resisted. They wore clothing suited to the work, skins and furs stitched with sinew, softened with use. Their hair might have been tied back to keep it from the flame, their faces marked with the same pigments they carried, either as decoration or by accident from their work. In the torchlight, their eyes would have reflected the same flickering gold that danced over the walls. Before painting began, there was likely preparation. A wall might be scraped clean to remove loose debris. If the stone was too damp, they might wait for a drier season or choose another spot. Sometimes the surface was shaped smoothed here, deepened there, to guide the illusion they sought to create. They understood the dialogue between stone and image, knowing that the rock's form could be as important as the pigment itself. You can imagine the first touch of charcoal, a simple black line, bold against the pale stone, perhaps marking the outline of a shoulder or the curve of a flank. The artist's hand would have moved with confidence. There was no erasing here, no trial sketching. Every mark was a commitment. The others in the group would watch, their torches tilting to illuminate the work, their shadows bending over the wall. When the black lines were in place, colour followed. Ochre for the rich reds and browns of bison hides, for the warm flanks of horses, white clay for mammoths, making them ghostly and luminous, manganese oxide for deep purples and blacks. These pigments had been gathered from far beyond the cave, scraped from cliffs, dug from riverbeds, carried in small amounts over long distances. Each colour was a treasure, and each stroke an offering. The work may not have been silent. The artist might hum or chant softly, keeping a rhythm. Companions might speak in low voices, their words echoing strangely in the stone chamber. The sounds could mingle with the faint hiss of the flames and the occasional drip of water from above. Perhaps certain sounds were meant to accompany certain images, binding them together in meaning. In the torchlight, the image would grow, the curve of a spine, the arch of a neck, the suggestion of a mane. The artist might use their fingers for smudging, the pads of their fingertips blending charcoal into softer shadows. Sometimes they blew pigment through hollow bones to create misty edges or fill in larger areas, their breath mixing with the dust to cling to the stone. And there, behind every mark, was intention. These were not idle decorations, they were statements, symbols, maybe even prayers. The animals chosen were not random, they were part of the world outside, creatures that fed and clothed the people, creatures that inspired awe or fear. In painting them here, deep underground, the artists were doing more than recording a sight, they were summoning presence. In the flicker of fire, the animals would seem alive, as if they had been called into the cave from the plains above. You imagine the moment when the group steps back, torches lifted high to see the work. The artist studies the lines, adjusts a shadow, adds a final stroke of white to catch the light on a horn or tusk. The others nod, perhaps making sounds of approval, or maybe falling into a respectful silence. For a brief time the animal lives here, its spirit fixed in pigment and stone. The artists might stay in the chamber for hours, working on multiple figures or adding to panels begun by others years before. Some parts of the cave bear layers of work, a bison painted over an older horse, a mammoth overlapping the curve of a reindeer. Time in the cave is not measured in hours alone, but in seasons and generations. One artist's work could inspire another decades later, the wall becoming a shared canvas across lifetimes. When the work was done for the night, the group might linger, letting the torches burn low. They could sit in a circle watching the new images shift in the light, speaking softly about hunts, about weather, about stories from the world above. The artist might lean back against the cool stone, hands still stained with pigment, knowing the marks they had made would remain long after they themselves were gone. Eventually the torches would be lowered, their flames pinched out, and the darkness would reclaim the space. But the art would stay. The walls would keep their secrets through floods and droughts, through winters and summers, until the cave was sealed by time itself. Standing here now, you realize how much of their presence remains. Not just the lines and colours, but the choices where to paint, what to depict, how to use the light. The cave is as much their creation as the art itself. It was shaped in a way by the minds and hands that entered it, each visit leaving an invisible trace in the air. You breathe deeply, smelling the faint earthiness of the stone, the centuries-old stillness. In that breath you feel the connection to the artist leaning in toward the wall, to the torchlight flickering over their face, to the sound of pigment being ground, to the hum of voices low in the chamber. You are, for a moment, part of that same act, the arrival of the artist, the beginning of creation in a place where darkness and light meet, to give birth to images that outlast memory. The chamber is still. The walls, smoothed by water long before humans came, hold the quiet like cupped hands. Into this silence the artist steps forward, torchlight spilling over pale stone. It is here, in this chosen space, that the first animal will emerge, a creature summoned not with flesh and bone but with line and shadow. The torchlight flickers, throwing shifting shapes across the surface, and the artist studies them carefully. They tilt their head, letting the natural curves of the wall suggest a shoulder, a hump, the broad sweep of muscle. The stone itself seems to whisper the form it wants to hold. This is not a random act of drawing. It is a collaboration between human vision and the ancient contours of the cave. In one hand the artist grips a piece of charcoal, dark and crumbly. It is no ordinary stick plucked from a fire. It has been chosen from the heartwood of certain trees, burned slowly to make a rich, deep black that clings to the stone. The first stroke comes without hesitation, a bold, confident curve marking the arch of the animal's back. In that instant the wall is no longer empty. Something has begun. The lines multiply, sweeping arcs for the flanks, a deep curve for the chest, strong lines marking the slope of the neck. The artist's fingers smudge where shadows need to soften, pressing pigment into the tiny pores of the limestone. They work close to the wall, their breath mingling with the faint scent of charred wood and the cool mineral air of the cave. The others stand behind, holding torches high, letting the light chase away the darkness just enough to reveal the growing form. This animal is a bison, a great heavy-bodied beast whose herds once roamed the grasslands above in vast numbers. To the people of this time, the bison is not just an animal but a source of life. Meat for sustenance, hides for warmth, bones for tools, sinew for thread. It is also a creature of strength and resilience, surviving harsh winters and fierce predators. To place it on the wall is to honor it, to give it presence in the realm of shadow and fire. The head takes shape next, a massive brow, the blunt power of the muzzle, the sharp arc of a horn. The artist leans back to check the proportions, then steps in again, adding finer details, the small curve of the nostril, the crease at the corner of the mouth, the suggestion of an eye watching from the stone. The eye is just a mark, yet it seems to follow the torchlight as it moves. Colour is added. From a small pouch, the artist takes a lump of ochre, red as baked earth. It is crushed to powder on a flat stone and mixed with animal fat until it becomes a smooth paste. Using fingers, a brush of chewed twigs, or even a strip of fur tied to a stick, the artist sweeps the pigment over the bison's flanks. The red deepens the image, making the creature glow against the pale limestone. In some places, the pigment is blown from the mouth through a hollow bone, creating a fine, even mist that settles into every contour of the wall. The torchlight makes the bison come alive. Shadows cling to the darker strokes, while the ochre catches the warm tones of the flame. The gentle movement of the fire makes the animal seem to shift its weight, to breathe, to take a step. For those watching, it is not hard to imagine the bison moving, its muscles rolling under the skin, its breath steaming in the cold air, its hooves thudding softly on the grass of the world outside. Perhaps the artist speaks to it now, softly, in words or sounds meant for the animal's spirit. Perhaps they hum a low note that vibrates in the stone, or touch the wall lightly in a gesture of respect. This is not just image-making, it is an act of connection. The painted bison is both a reminder of the physical world and a bridge to something deeper, something the people feel but cannot name. Hours may pass in this work. The bison grows more complete with each careful addition, the texture of the mane, the weight of the shoulder, the subtle curve of the belly. When the artist steps back at last, the others move closer, their torches casting overlapping pools of light. The creature is there now, fixed in pigment, yet alive in the fire's dance. It is the first animal in this part of the cave, and it will not be the last. In time, others will join it, more bison, horses, mammoths, lions, but this one stands alone for the moment, its presence filling the chamber with a quiet gravity. For those gathered, it is as if a piece of the living world has been brought into the earth's heart. When the group leaves, they do so with care. The torches are lifted away, and the darkness moves in again, wrapping around the bison like a protective cloak. The air grows still. The cave will keep the image safe for thousands of years, long after the footsteps fade and the fire's scent is gone. Standing here now, imagining that first animal's appearance, you feel the same wonder those ancient eyes must have felt. The wall is more than stone. It is memory, vision, and reverence bound together. And in the bison's strong lines and steady gaze, you glimpse something timeless, the human need to see, to remember, and to bring life into places where none exists except in the mind's quiet fire. The path narrows as you move deeper into the cave. The air grows cooler, heavier with the scent of stone and the faint memory of smoke from torches long extinguished. Your steps echo softly, and each sound seems to linger as if reluctant to leave this hidden place. The light from your guide's torch stretches forward in hesitant waves, brushing the walls in glimmers, catching on uneven surfaces that hint at more to come. Then, turning a slow bend, the passage widens into a chamber that feels almost cathedral-like in its stillness. Here, the walls are alive, not with movement in the physical sense, but with a captured energy so vivid that it feels as though the creatures could break free at any moment. Before you stretches the deep gallery, a great sweep of stone covered in the shapes of horses. They move not in a single herd but in layered groups, overlapping, their bodies rendered with swift, confident strokes that tell of a hand accustomed to both observation and memory. Some are drawn in profile, heads lifted as though sniffing the wind. Others bend their necks toward invisible grass, mid-step in a slow graze. Still others seem caught in full gallop, manes flying, nostrils flared, muscles tense beneath their hide. The artist, or perhaps many artists over years, has used the natural bulges and recesses of the limestone to give each horse dimension. The curve of a shoulder becomes more pronounced where the wall swells outward, while a hollow in the rock gives depth to an eye, or the shadow of a jaw. The skill here is remarkable, but it is not skill for its own sake. It is a deliberate weaving of form and surface, a way of letting the stone itself help shape the vision. Charcoal outlines define the horse's forms, the black lines ranging from thick, forceful sweeps to delicate, almost hesitant marks. Over these outlines, pigment has been added in layers, warm browns and russet reds made from ochre, pale creams from ground limestone, perhaps even hints of manganese black for the deepest shadows. Some pigments were applied by hand, others blown through hollow reeds, leaving a soft-edged haze that suggests muscle tone and movement. In the torchlight, the colours shift and breathe, and the horses seem to ripple with life. What strikes you most is the sense of motion. The artist has repeated certain lines, the arc of a neck, the thrust of a leg, as if to show not one moment frozen in time, but a sequence, a rhythm. Your eyes follow these repetitions and begin to see the horses running, stepping, turning. The flicker of the torch plays its part, making shadows dart along the lines and across the curves of the wall, animating the scene in a way no fixed light ever could. In this chamber, 30,000 years collapse into an instant, and the horses run again. You wonder about the people who made these images. Did they know each animal as an individual, recognizing the slope of a particular mare's back or the scar along a stallion's flank? Or did they paint from an idea of horse, distilled from countless glimpses on the plains above? Perhaps they painted in gratitude after a successful hunt, or in hope before one. Or perhaps the horses had a meaning far beyond the physical, a symbol of speed, freedom, or the cycles of migration and return. The chamber's acoustics add another layer to the experience. If you stand in the center and speak softly, your voice returns in a warm, rounded echo as if the walls themselves were answering. It is easy to imagine ancient voices here, chanting, singing, telling stories that match the gallop on the walls. Sound and image together could have made this space a place of ceremony, where the boundaries between the seen and unseen were thinnest. Moving closer, you notice handprints near the base of the panel. Faint, smudged, some partial. They could belong to the artists themselves or to others who touched the wall in reverence, perhaps after the images were completed. One print is small, perhaps a child's. That child may have stood here in awe, the firelight dancing across the horses, sensing something they could not yet put into words but would carry for a lifetime. The horses vary in scale. Some are small, perhaps sketches or practice outlines, or symbols rather than depictions. Others stretch several feet across, dominating their section of wall. The larger figures seem to anchor the composition, their massive presence holding the smaller ones in a kind of visual herd. There is no obvious beginning or end. The horses seem to flow across the wall like a river, each one linked by an unspoken rhythm to the next. You picture the process. The chamber is dark except for the warm, pulsing light of fire. The artist crouches close to the stone, adjusting the torch so that the shadows fall just right. Each stroke must be made with care. Mistakes are difficult to hide on the pale limestone, and the wall's irregularities demand constant adaptation. The tools are simple: a piece of charcoal, a palette of pigments, a reed for blowing colour, yet in the right hands they can summon a world. The torchlight today still makes the horses stir. It catches on the sweep of a back, the point of an ear, the line of a tail mid-swish. You half expect to hear the soft thud of hooves, the rush of breath through flared nostrils. In this moment, the cave becomes less a place of stone and more a living memory, one you can step into simply by standing still and letting your eyes adjust. And then you think of time. These horses have been here for tens of millennia, untouched by sun, wind, or rain. Generations have passed without ever knowing they existed. Only in the last few decades have modern eyes gazed upon them again, and even now, the real gallery remains closed to all but a few scientists and conservators. The rest of us see them only in photographs or replicas, yet even those copies carry some echo of the original's power. Here, in the deep gallery, that power is undiminished. The chamber is quiet except for the faint hiss of the torch. You let your gaze wander over the herd once more, following the flow of lines, feeling the rhythm settle into your breathing. The horses, forever mid-stride, seem to invite you to follow, not just deeper into the cave, but deeper into a shared human past, one in which art was not a luxury but a way of knowing and honouring the world. The air grows even colder as you leave the deep gallery of horses behind, the rhythmic lines and flowing motion of their painted bodies still flickering in your mind. The tunnel narrows again, and your footsteps slow to match the lowering ceiling. The rock under your hand feels slick in places, polished by the countless years of stillness and the touch of water seeping through the limestone. Your torchlight pushes ahead, hesitant and warm, illuminating only what is necessary, letting the rest remain in the comfort of darkness. Then, the passage opens, and your breath catches. Before you looms a vision from a time when the earth was colder, when glaciers pressed down from the north and vast grasslands spread across the land. A herd of mammoths stands upon the wall, immense, ghostly, rendered in pale white clay that almost glows against the deeper tones of the stone. Their presence is silent yet immense, a frozen migration from 30 millennia past, captured not in flesh and bone but in strokes of human hands. They are massive in scale, each figure stretching from the ground toward the curve of the chamber's ceiling. The artist has not tried to fill in every detail, and yet every detail is there. The sloping forehead, the long curve of tusks reaching forward, the thick arch of shoulders beneath their shaggy coats. All are evoked with a mixture of strong, deliberate lines and soft, smudged shading. The clay itself catches the light differently from pigment, reflecting it in a muted, diffuse glow that gives the mammoths an otherworldly presence. Unlike the restless, galloping horses, these mammoths stand firm. Some face forward as if acknowledging the viewer. Others are shown in profile, tusks sweeping wide like arcs of pale moonlight. A few smaller figures, perhaps calves, huddle close to the great forms of the adults. Their trunks curve gently toward each other, suggesting touch, perhaps reassurance, perhaps communication. You step closer, careful not to let your shadow swallow them entirely. The lines are both bold and restrained, as though the artist understood the weight of the creatures they depicted. There is a gravity to these figures, not just physical mass, but a sense of time, endurance, and the deep memory of a species that roamed the Ice Age world for hundreds of thousands of years. The mammoths are gone now, their bones scattered in frozen soils and riverbeds. But here, they are eternal. It is possible the artist used the very shape of the wall to amplify their forms. The slight swell of the stone at the chest of one mammoth makes it appear as if the beast is stepping forward into the chamber. A subtle hollow beneath another's tusk catches the shadow just so, giving depth and weight to the curve. These were not casual drawings, they were composed with the patience and intention of people for whom art was not separate from survival or spirituality. You imagine the scene when these images were first made. Torches placed carefully in stone niches, their flames steady but alive. A group of people gathered, perhaps hunters, perhaps families, perhaps those with a special role in the community, watching as the artist mixed clay with water, smoothing it onto the wall, then etching and shaping it with fingers or simple tools. The sound of breath would have been soft but constant, the air warming slightly as more bodies filled the chamber. The flickering light would have made the mammoths seem to shift, the shadows of their tusks moving like slow pendulums across the rock. The choice of clay is intriguing. Unlike pigment, it could be molded, pushed and spread, adding a tactile quality to the image. Perhaps the artist wanted to feel the mammoth take shape beneath their hands, as if contact with the material brought them closer to the spirit of the animal. And when the clay dried, it bound the image to the stone in a way that has lasted for tens of thousands of years. There is something deeply quiet about this panel. The horses were full of motion and sound in the mind's ear, pounding hooves, snorting breath, but the mammoths stand in a kind of hush. You almost expect to hear the faint crunch of snow beneath their massive feet, the distant rumble of a low call echoing across a winter plain. But in the cave, the only sound is the faint dripping of water somewhere in the darkness, a sound that may well have been there when the images were new. These animals were both a source of sustenance and a challenge to the people who painted them. A single mammoth could feed a group for weeks, its hide and bones used for shelter, tools and clothing. But hunting such a creature would have been dangerous and rare, requiring cooperation, courage, and perhaps ritual preparation. Standing before their painted forms might have been part of that preparation, a way to honor the animal, to ask for success, or to remember hunts past. You take in the whole panel from a distance. The herd seems to stretch beyond the limits of the wall, as if the stone is only a window into a greater unseen migration. The clay lines fade at the edges, not because they were worn away, but because the artist left them incomplete, allowing the imagination to carry the rest. In this way, the scene is not fixed. It is always in motion, always moving through the mind of the viewer. Close to the floor, near the feet of one of the mammoths, you spot faint depressions in the stone, perhaps ancient footprints, perhaps just the irregularities of the cave surface. The thought that a person may have stood here thousands of years ago looking up at their own work or the work of another brings the moment sharply into focus. You are not just seeing the mammoths, you are sharing a position, a vantage point with someone long gone but not forgotten. The light from your torch begins to waver, and in that unsteady glow the mammoths seem almost to sway. The tusks catch the light and cast sweeping shadows, while the pale bodies seem to brighten and dim as if caught between presence and absence. You feel a weight in your chest, the awareness that these creatures lived and vanished, yet here they remain, given a kind of immortality by human hands. When it is time to move on, you turn slowly, letting your eyes rest on the herd one final time. They do not follow, but their silent watch feels unbroken. As you step back into the narrower passage, the cold air wraps around you again, and the sound of your own breath becomes the loudest thing you hear. The mammoths recede into the darkness behind you, but their presence lingers, as steady and enduring as the stone itself. The passage twists again, and the air feels heavier, more charged, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. You move slowly, letting the light of your torch creep along the stone, revealing patches of bare surface, then sudden fragments of colour, deep black, ochre, faint reddish tones clinging to the contours of the wall. You feel a pull forward, like a story that wants to be told, and then, without warning, they are there. A row of lions emerges from the gloom, their bodies lean and tense, drawn with a confidence that feels almost alive. They prowl across the wall in a procession, each one caught mid-step, muscles coiled as if ready to spring. Unlike the mammoths, these figures are not still guardians, they are predators in motion, eyes fixed, jaws slightly open, and bodies angled as if closing in on unseen prey. The first thing you notice is the gaze. The lions look past you into a space you cannot see, locked on something that has claimed their complete attention. The artist has given them eyes that are not simply dots of pigment, but carefully shaped, filled with a darkness that seems to draw you in. You almost feel the need to turn your head to see what they are watching, though of course nothing is there, nothing but the rock and the flicker of your flame. The composition is deliberate. Some lions are fully drawn with strong outlines and careful shading. Others are half finished, their forms fading into the background, suggesting movement through space or perhaps the presence of more animals than could be shown in detail. It's as though the artist wanted to capture not just the animals themselves, but the sensation of being surrounded by them, a tension in the air, a moment before action. You step closer, tracing the length of the panel with your eyes. The lions' heads are slightly lowered, ears back, their bodies angled forward. They are not in the chaos of attack, but in that precise razor-thin moment before the burst of speed, when every muscle is held in check. You can almost hear the silence of the hunt, the controlled breathing, the faint scrape of claws on stone or earth. The use of the cave wall's natural curves is masterful here. A subtle bulge in the stone serves as the shoulder of one lion, giving it an added sense of strength. A shallow hollow beneath another makes its ribcage appear sunken, as if it has not eaten in days. The play of light and shadow from your torch transforms the flat drawings into something sculptural, something breathing. It's easy to imagine the original setting. A small group gathered in this chamber, the firelight licking the edges of the stone, making the lions seem to shift forward, then draw back. Perhaps the viewers, hunters, children, elders knew exactly what scene was being told here. Perhaps it was part of a larger story passed down through generations, one that blended memory, myth, and survival. You consider what these lions meant to the people who painted them. In Ice Age Europe, lions were real and formidable predators larger than the ones we know today, powerful enough to threaten humans as much as prey animals. To stand face to face with one in the open would have been rare and dangerous, a moment etched deep into memory. To depict them here might have been an act of reverence, a way to fix their power in place, or even a means of taking some control over it through the act of creation. The colours used are simple but effective: black charcoal for the outlines and deeper shadows, ochre for warmth and body. In some places the lines are thick and sure, in others they are quick, almost like sketches. The variation gives the panel a sense of immediacy, as if the artist was working quickly to capture a fleeting vision before it faded. Moving along the wall, you notice that not all the lions face the same direction. A few turn their heads slightly toward one another, their expressions unreadable but somehow knowing. The arrangement gives the impression of coordinated movement, a hunting strategy frozen in pigment. It's not hard to imagine the prey just beyond the edge of the painting, perhaps the bison you saw earlier, or horses, or even something more symbolic. The atmosphere in the chamber feels different from the others. Where the mammoth gallery had a slow, solemn presence, this space feels sharper, more alert. You find yourself breathing a little more quietly, your body instinctively matching the stillness of the hunt. The torch crackles softly, its light shifting across the panel, animating the lion's steps in a way that feels almost deliberate, as though the cave and the fire were meant to work together to bring these figures to life. Your mind drifts to the people who might have stood here before you, separated by tens of thousands of years, but connected by the same human impulse to watch, to imagine, to understand through story and image. A child might have sat cross-legged on the floor, wide-eyed at the sight of the lions appearing from the dark. An elder might have nodded slowly, recalling the feel of the hunt, the danger of being too close. The artist might have stood slightly apart, torch in hand, watching their work in the shifting light, knowing they had captured something essential. You crouch slightly to follow the lowest figures in the panel. One lion, smaller and more roughly drawn, seems almost hidden, its outline faint and worn. Was it unfinished, or was it deliberately placed in the background, a reminder that the hunt is never about one predator alone? In the real world, lions hunted in groups, their success dependent on timing, teamwork, and instinct, qualities that early humans would have understood deeply in their own survival. As you take a final look before moving on, you notice a series of faint scratch marks near the edge of the panel. They don't form an image, but they might once have been part of a test, a way to prepare the surface, or even the remnants of something erased. They are quiet traces of human presence, the kind that linger like whispers long after the voices are gone. You step back, letting the whole scene settle in your mind. The lions do not break their gaze. They remain fixed on their invisible prey, eternal in their moment of poised intent. And as you turn to follow the winding path deeper into the cave, you carry with you the sense that something is following, not in menace, but in watchfulness. The hunt is frozen, but the feeling of being part of it moves with you. You move on from the lions, the air still holding the taut silence of the hunt, and find yourself in a quieter, stranger part of the cave. The walls here are different. They do not burst with animals in motion or grand sweeping scenes. Instead, they are dotted and marked with shapes that do not immediately reveal their meaning. Your torchlight catches a scattering of red dots, perfect, deliberate, placed with intention rather than accident. Some are clustered together, forming small constellations on the stone. Others are arranged in neat lines as though someone was counting. You step closer, tilting the torch to see if there is more beneath the surface, and indeed faint scratches emerge, barely visible, cutting across the dots like the strokes of some lost alphabet. There is a handprint too. It appears suddenly as you shift the light, a ghostly negative form where the artist must have pressed their hand against the rock and blown pigment around it, leaving the pale shape of their palm and fingers. The hand is small, possibly that of a young person, though no one can say for certain. The outline is sharp, almost as if it were made yesterday, the fine spray of pigment frozen in time. You find another, slightly larger, nearby. This one has a finger missing, not in the hand itself of course, but in the shape. One of the digits has been deliberately shortened, the pigment cut off as if the finger were folded down before the paint was applied. Was it a symbol, a code, a way of saying something without words? Some researchers believe these hand signs could have been a form of communication, a way to record information, or even part of a ritual. Others think they might have been marks of belonging, signatures left behind by those who ventured into the darkness. The wall continues with zigzag lines etched rather than painted. They shimmer faintly as the torchlight moves, carved into the soft limestone with a sharp tool. The lines bend and twist, sometimes forming repeating patterns, sometimes breaking off into nothing. It's hard not to think of them as messages, though their meaning is long gone. Were they instructions, spiritual signs, or something as simple as practice, the ancient equivalent of doodling on a blank page? What makes this chamber so striking is that, unlike the animal panels, the meaning here is not shared even by scholars. With the bison, the horses, the lions, you can imagine the scene, the reason, the connection to hunting, survival, or reverence for the animals. But these symbols are abstract, personal, and perhaps deliberately obscure. They resist your interpretation. They feel as if they were never meant to be fully understood except by those who made them. You run your hand gently over the air above the wall, careful not to touch. The space feels charged, almost like being in the presence of an unspoken truth. These marks have waited in the dark for tens of thousands of years, and even now, with all our science, they remain silent. They are an unsolved puzzle, a conversation that began long before you and will continue long after. Some of the symbols are layered over older ones, a palimpsest of meaning. Red ochre covers faint black lines, and beneath those, the stone itself shows faint depressions that might once have been carved. You realize that this wall was used again and again by different people over centuries, perhaps even millennia, each adding their own marks, responding to those who came before. The cave becomes not just a gallery, but a dialogue, a place where thoughts were stored and revisited, even if the language itself is lost. You remember reading that certain shapes appear again and again in caves across Europe. Dots, lines, chevrons, spirals, even something like a ladder. This suggests that there might have been a shared symbolic vocabulary, a way for different groups to communicate through form. Perhaps these were markers of time, seasons, migrations, lunar cycles, or perhaps they were tied to myths and stories, the kind told around firelight above ground, only hinted at here in the stone. The handprints are what draw you back again and again. You count 5 in total in this section, each a different size and placement. They seem almost to greet you, silent reminders that living hands pressed against these same walls so long ago. Some are made with red pigment, others with black. You imagine the act of making one, grinding the pigment, mixing it with water or saliva, placing the hand flat against the cool stone, then blowing the colour from the mouth to fix it in place. It is an act that combines breath, body, and the will to leave a trace. You can't help but think about the people themselves. What did they look like standing here with their torches? Were they solemn, treating this as a sacred act? Or were they laughing, experimenting, enjoying the simple act of leaving their mark? The truth is, these walls hold both possibilities. The silence of the cave today feels heavy and reverent, but perhaps in their time it was alive with voices, the crackle of fire, the shuffle of feet. You step back, taking in the wall as a whole. The dots form their own rhythm, the zigzags seem to move with your shifting light, and the handprints rest like quiet signatures in the midst of it all. The effect is hypnotic, as though you are looking at a message written in a language your body understands but your mind cannot translate. As you turn to leave the chamber, you feel a lingering sense of unfinished business. The animals of the cave told stories you could almost follow. Here, the story slips away from you, leaving only the feeling that meaning was once here, and still is if only you could find the right way to see it. You carry that mystery with you as you move toward the next bend in the passage, the torchlight dancing on the walls. You step away from the wall of mysterious marks and enter a section of the cave where the air feels different, lighter, somehow, and tinged with a faint echo. Your footsteps make a low, rounded sound as though the stone is speaking back to you. You pause, listening. Even in the near silence, the cave seems alive, its walls holding not only the images of the past but the memory of voices. Archaeologists have long suspected that caves like this were chosen not just for shelter or secrecy, but for their acoustics. You test it yourself, humming softly into the darkness. The sound swells, bouncing off the curved walls and returning to you richer, deeper, and somehow more complete than when it left your lips. It is as if the cave takes your voice and gives it back transformed. Your torchlight flickers against the walls, catching small, irregular curves in the stone that shape the sound. These chambers were not carved by human hands, yet they seem made for music, natural amphitheatres hidden beneath the earth. You imagine a group of people standing here 30,000 years ago, their voices rising in chant or song, the sound rolling outward in waves, blending with the flicker of firelight and the shadows of painted animals. The experience would have been overwhelming, sound, sight, and movement, all woven together in one living ritual. Researchers have tested this theory, mapping the echoes and resonances of the cave. They discovered that many of the most resonant spots are precisely where the richest paintings are found. It suggests something deliberate, that the artist knew where sound was strongest, and that the images and the acoustics were part of the same experience. Perhaps they sang to the bison as they painted, letting the walls themselves carry the sound deeper into the stone. Perhaps the rhythms of drumming or clapping echoed through these passages, making the painted horses seem to gallop in the shifting torchlight. You walk slowly, testing the resonance with each step. A low hum in one place sounds almost like the distant call of an animal. A sharp clap of your hands brings back a fast, rattling echo, as though the walls themselves are applauding. You notice how different sections of the passage hold different tones, some warm and rounded, others sharp and metallic. It is easy to see how ancient people might have treated these places as sacred instruments, playing them during ceremonies. There is another layer to this. The sound of your own breath seems amplified here. You inhale slowly, and the soft rush of air fills the space like a hidden river. Exhaling, you hear it again, the steady living presence of your body meeting the stillness of the cave. Imagine this multiplied by a dozen breaths, 24, each person's exhale blending into the next, the air shifting and swirling with warmth and moisture, the torch flames reacting with tiny wavering movements. You remember reading that certain caves have been found with simple bone flutes and percussion tools, and you wonder if the people of this place once brought such instruments here. The sound of a flute would linger in this space like a bird's call in a deep canyon, twisting and bending as it bounced from wall to wall. The beat of a drum would travel far, finding the stone's natural frequency and making it vibrate faintly underfoot. One experiment by modern researchers involved blindfolding volunteers and asking them to walk through a cave, stopping wherever they felt compelled to sing or make sound. Time and again, the chosen spots matched the painted areas. It's as though sound itself guided people to the places where art should live. You look around and realize you are standing in just such a spot now, where the echo carries far but returns warmly, and where the walls are alive with marks and shapes. You test your own voice again, letting out a single drawn-out note. It stretches, softens, and returns to you with a strange intimacy, as though the cave is singing back directly into your chest. The sound bypasses thought and goes straight to sensation, a vibration felt as much as heard. You can almost imagine the ancestors standing here, feeling the same thing, perhaps believing that the cave was alive and answering them. And maybe it was. Sound has always been a bridge between the seen and unseen, between the ordinary and the sacred. In the dark, where sight is limited and shadows play tricks, hearing becomes sharper, more meaningful. The echoes could have been interpreted as the voices of spirits, the approval of ancestors, or even the breath of the animals painted on the walls. Your torch crackles faintly as you move forward, its hiss and pop merging with the cave's own quiet voice. You think of the silence outside, the still air of the valley, and how different this place must have felt in contrast. Down here there is a sense of presence, not empty silence, but the kind that is filled with potential sound. You realize that even your stillness is part of it, the cave waiting for you to add your own voice to its collection. In this moment, the art and the acoustics become inseparable in your mind. The bison are not just images, but participants in a performance. The dots and zigzags are not just marks, but perhaps visual echoes of sound. You wonder if the people of this time had a word that meant both painting and song, or if their language was woven tightly enough that the distinction was meaningless. You move on, but the sounds follow you. The hum of your own voice still lingering in memory, the imagined drum beats, the low chorus of a group chanting together. This chamber, like the others, was never just about what could be seen. It was about what could be felt in the bones, carried in the air and sent shivering through the stone. As you reach the next bend, you take one last slow breath, listening to how it expands in the space, how it returns to you softer and rounder, like a friend answering from just out of sight. The cave has spoken in its own way, and though you cannot understand the full meaning, you carry the sensation with you, the memory of stone that can sing. The deeper you go into the cave, the more you realize that nothing here existed in isolation. Every painting, every echo, every shadow was shaped not only by the stone itself, but by the elements people brought with them. Chief among them were fire, the only light they had, and breath, the invisible presence of every living person who entered. Together, these two forces transformed the cave from a silent hollow into a living, shifting environment. You stop and picture it. A small group of people gathering just outside the entrance, carrying bundles of wood, perhaps resin-rich pine for brighter flame, or oak for a steady long burn. They may have brought animal fat to feed the fire, turning it into a glowing liquid fuel. Torches would be prepared, long sticks wrapped at one end with plant fibers or strips of bark, bound with sinew, dipped in resin. The moment they stepped into the cave and struck the first spark, the transformation began. The darkness inside these caves is absolute. Without light, you can't even see your own hand inches from your face. But fire changes that instantly. The first flare of a torch doesn't just reveal the walls, it sets them in motion. Shadows leap outward, racing along the curves of rock. Every painting, every carving seems to shift and breathe. A bison painted mid-stride suddenly appears to move. A horse's mane ripples. The eyes of a lion catch the light and seem to follow you. You realize that in the Paleolithic world, fire wasn't just practical illumination, it was a performance tool. The artists and their companions knew how to angle the torchlight, how to make the shadows dance, how to time the movement of the flame so that the art itself seemed alive. In that flickering glow, the cave wasn't static, it was theatre. And then there's the breath. Even now your own exhale mingles with the air around you, a soft, warm cloud in the cool underground stillness. Imagine a dozen or more people gathered in a small chamber. Every breath they take adds heat, moisture and carbon dioxide to the air. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere changes. The walls, cool to the touch, begin to glisten faintly with condensation. The sound of breathing, slow, fast, or in rhythm with chanting, becomes part of the cave's soundscape. Breath also interacts with the fire. A sudden exhale near a torch makes the flame flare. A collective gasp might send every shadow jumping in unison. Inhaling deeply to blow on embers feeds the glow, sending sparks up in twisting spirals. The boundary between human life and firelight blurs. Both rely on oxygen, both flicker and fade without fuel. You recall that some archaeological teams have recreated ancient torches and carried them into caves like this one. They report that the smoke lingers low at first, hugging the stone ceiling, then slowly drifts along the passages, carried by unseen currents. In some areas, the air feels heavier, and the smell of charred resin and fat mixes with the mineral scent of the cave. These conditions must have shaped how long people could stay, how far they could go, and where they chose to linger. The torchlight also dictated what could be seen. In the wide glow near the flame, Colours popped, deep ochres, blacks and whites standing out sharply. But a few steps away, those same colours softened, merged and disappeared into shadow. Artists may have painted with one hand while holding a torch in the other, watching as each new line took on life in the wavering light. This could explain why so many Paleolithic images are dynamic, even exaggerated. They were made to be seen in movement, not in the still, even light of a modern museum. Fire also had symbolic weight. To bring flame into the earth's depths was to carry a piece of the sun underground. In myths from many later cultures, fire is a gift from the gods or stolen from the heavens. It's easy to imagine that these early people saw fire as something sacred, something alive. Feeding it, protecting it, and carrying it deeper into the cave might have been as much ritual as necessity. And breath. It is perhaps the most personal of elements. You can share food, water, tools, but breath is a constant exchange between you and the world. In a cave, that exchange is intensified. The air you exhale mixes with the ancient stillness, your warmth softening the chill. Some anthropologists suggest that the act of breathing in such a space might have felt like merging with the cave itself, as though the rock were inhaling and exhaling with you. Consider how this might have influenced ceremonies. Picture a group sitting in a circle, torches casting a trembling glow, all breathing in unison. Maybe they hummed, chanted or sang, letting their breath shape the sounds that filled the chamber. The fire responded, leaning toward them, shrinking back, or sending shadows racing across the painted walls. The entire scene would have felt alive, and in that shared rhythm, humans, fire, and cave became one. You notice a faint blackening on the rock above you, the ghost of an ancient flame. It's not hard to imagine a torch once burning here, held high as someone studied the curve of the wall or reached up to add a final line to a painting. The carbon from that fire still lingers, a silent witness to the moment. Walking further, you see how the passages twist and narrow. In such tight spaces, the heat from fire and breath would rise quickly. Faces would flush, sweat would bead on foreheads, and the light would turn every drop into a tiny star. Moving deeper meant balancing the need for light against the limits of breathable air. Every breath mattered. Every flame was precious. As you pause, you become aware of your own breathing again, the gentle rise and fall of your chest, the faint hiss of air past your nose. The torch in your mind's eye flickers, and the cave around you feels warmer, more alive. You understand now that neither the art nor the space could exist in their full power without fire and breath. One brought vision, the other life. And perhaps that's why, thousands of years later, we can still feel the presence of the people who once stood here. Their breath still clings in the story of this place. The light of their fires still dances in the shapes they left behind. In the union of those two elements, one visible, one invisible, the cave became a place where time stood still, where dreams were painted into stone, and where human presence left more than just images. It left the memory of life itself. The deeper you go, the more the cave feels like it is drawing you into its heart. The wide galleries where you could walk upright without effort begin to narrow, the ceiling lowering, the walls leaning in. The air grows cooler still, yet heavier, tinged with a mineral dampness that clings to your skin. Your torchlight throws long shadows that twist across the rock, revealing glimpses of paintings here and there, fragments of animals, a single curved horn, the outline of a flank. They feel like promises, hints of something waiting farther ahead. The first tight passage appears almost without warning, a constriction in the rock no wider than a person's shoulders. The ancient visitors must have crawled through here, torches in hand, their knees pressing into the damp earth, their backs scraping against stone. You lower yourself now, feeling the cool grit under your palms. The sound changes instantly. No more distant echoes, just the close, muffled hush of stone pressing in on all sides. The flicker of the torch ahead makes the rock seem to breathe in and out. You think of what it meant to push this far. In the outer chambers, the cave could feel like an extension of the surface world, a sheltered place, but still somehow connected to daylight. Here, that connection is severed. The only light is the one you carry. The only warmth is from your body and the fire. The air is still and expectant, and the silence is absolute. At times, the passage flattens so low you have to press yourself almost belly to the ground, inching forward. Every movement sends the torchlight wobbling, shadows jumping in sudden shapes, a startled bison, a giant handprint, the ghost of a mammoth tusk emerging from the wall and vanishing again. You imagine the people who came before, their breath quickening in this same confined space, their hearts pounding not just from the crawl but from the knowledge that they were crossing a threshold. Then, suddenly, the rock opens up again into a small chamber. It's not grand like the galleries behind you. Its ceiling is low and the walls curve in uneven arcs. But the paintings here are intimate, close enough that you could touch them if you dared. Lines of ochre and black form the shapes of creatures rarely seen in the larger spaces. Solitary ibex, crouched bears, strange half-animal figures whose meanings have been lost to time. The closeness makes them feel personal, as if you've stumbled into a private place, a corner meant for quiet conversations between human and stone. You wonder if only certain people were allowed here. The effort to reach this point is significant, not just physically but psychologically. In darkness this deep, every sound, every flicker of movement is magnified. It takes a particular kind of mind to choose to go farther when the cave begins to resist your passage. Perhaps those who came here were leaders, shamans, visionaries, or simply the most curious souls among their people. Moving on, the path narrows again, forcing you to shuffle sideways, one shoulder scraping against the rock. The torch sputters slightly, its light trembling against the walls. You notice soot marks high above, signs of ancient fire held aloft by someone taller, perhaps standing on a ledge to reach this point. You picture them here, long ago, pausing to catch their breath before moving deeper still. The floor becomes uneven, studded with loose stones and shallow pools of water. Your steps splash softly, and the ripples catch the light in silver arcs. In places, the ceiling drips steadily, each drop ringing faintly in the quiet. These sounds must have been the same thousands of years ago, a steady background rhythm to the journey. At last you come to another chamber, this one taller, the air inside cooler, fresher. It feels like a reward after the struggle of the narrow passages. Here, the walls are covered with overlapping images, horses galloping, their legs a blur of repeated lines, reindeer lifting their heads as if sensing something unseen, massive aurochs standing in silent dominance. The paintings seem to swirl together, as though the artists were trying to capture not just the animals but the movement of an entire world. You realize now that going deeper isn't just about seeing more, it's about changing yourself along the way. The act of squeezing through the rock, of surrendering to the darkness and the closeness, alters your perception. The paintings aren't simply there to be looked at, they are earned, and in earning them, you begin to see them differently. And perhaps that was the point. In a time before written language, before books or temples, the cave itself was both sacred text and sacred space. To enter its deepest places was to step into a living story, one that demanded effort, courage, and trust. The narrow passages acted like the spine of that story, each chamber a chapter, each painting a sentence. As you stand in the heart of this deeper chamber, you let the torchlight roam over the walls. Every detail seems sharper now, the deliberate curves, the way pigment follows the natural contours of the stone, the faint outlines where an artist's hand once rested for balance. The cave feels less like a place you are visiting, and more like a presence that is allowing you to pass through. When you turn back toward the passage, the darkness beyond the torch seems thicker than before, as if it wants to keep you here. But the way forward, or rather backward toward the surface, is clear, and you know that every step you take from this point on will be touched by the memory of having come this far. It happens slowly. Your eyes adjust, your mind calms from the press of the narrow passage, and then you see them. At first they are just shallow depressions in the hardened clay of the cave floor, but then the light shifts and the outlines sharpen. Toes, arches, heels, footprints. You crouch down instinctively, bringing the torch closer, your own shadow spilling over them like a protective cloak. The prints are small, some no longer than the length of your palm, others closer to the size of your own feet. The clay around them has hardened over tens of thousands of years, preserving them exactly as they were left, each curve of a toe, each slight splay from weight shifting forward. Some prints run in a straight line toward a far chamber, others wander to the side as if the person who made them paused, looked around, maybe even hesitated before continuing. And then you notice the second set, not human this time, paw prints, round and deliberate, spaced further apart. You lean closer, tracing them with your eyes. They belong to a wolf, or perhaps a large dog-like animal, though in this time wolves roamed freely. The two sets of tracks weave together along the same path. Did the animal follow the human, or did they travel together, companions in this dark and echoing place? The scene forms in your mind. A small group enters the cave, carrying their torches and tools, their bodies warm from the fire they left behind at the surface. The ground here is damp, the clay soft underfoot. Each step presses their weight into it, leaving the impressions that you now gaze upon. One child perhaps walks barefoot, while another person taller, perhaps older, moves steadily ahead. The wolf's paws press alongside them, its claws dimpling the clay, its ears twitching at the distant sounds of dripping water. You find yourself holding your breath. The footprints are so intimate, so unfiltered by the centuries, that it feels as if their owners could still be just ahead of you, turning a corner into the next chamber. There's no sense of ruin here, no decay, only a stillness that has preserved a moment of life with astonishing clarity. Archaeologists have studied these prints carefully, mapping their positions, measuring the depth and spacing to estimate age, height, and gait. They've even recreated the likely scene, imagining the rhythm of the steps, the speed of the movement, and whether the ground was wetter or drier on that particular day. Some suggest that the prints may have been left over multiple visits, the clay resoftened by moisture before hardening again. But standing here, you prefer to see them as one continuous walk, a single journey caught and held by time. It's hard not to wonder what these people were thinking. Did the child know they were leaving a trace that would last for millennia? Or was their mind on something else? The play of torchlight on the walls, the excitement of exploring, or the comfort of having an adult nearby? And what of the wolf? Was it watchful, protective, curious? Did it belong to them? Or was it simply drawn into the cave by the smell of smoke and the flicker of light? You shift your weight, careful not to disturb the ground around the prints. The air here feels cooler, almost reverent. You imagine this chamber as a threshold, a place where the living world outside and the painted world deeper in the cave met. Perhaps the prints mark not just movement but intention, a decision to enter a space of meaning, to leave behind the familiar and step into the realm of shadows and stories. The torchlight catches on something else nearby. Faint, almost erased impressions that suggest someone once knelt here, maybe to adjust a torch, to rest, or to work on something small and intricate. You can almost see the crouched figure, the soft exhale of breath, the quiet concentration in the dim light. Farther along, the tracks disappear into drier ground where the floor has crumbled and shifted over time. Whatever came next, whether laughter, silence, or the scratch of pigment on stone, has been lost to the ages, and yet in these few preserved steps you hold a complete moment. There's something humbling about it. In the paintings, the people who lived here speak to you through the images they chose, the bison, the horses, the symbols. In the footprints, they speak to you through themselves, through the simple, undeniable proof of their bodies in motion. It's not art, it's not myth, it's not ritual, it's presence. They were here. You linger a while, committing every curve and line to memory. You think about how fragile such traces are, how easily they could have been washed away or crushed long before anyone thought to protect them. And you feel grateful that the cave sealed itself for tens of thousands of years, grateful that the prints remained hidden until they could be seen with care. As you stand again, the wolf's tracks seem to lead your gaze forward into the deeper dark. It's a silent invitation to follow, to see where the path leads next. You take one last look back at the human footprints, small, perfect, eternal, and then step carefully onward, the past still beneath your feet. The deeper you move into the cave, the more the paintings seem to gather around you like a silent audience. The air feels different here, denser, almost charged. It's not just the weight of time, it's the weight of intention. You can sense it in the way the images are placed, in the way the walls have been chosen and prepared, in the way the figures emerge from the rock as if they were meant to be here all along. This is not a place for casual decoration. The people who came here didn't wander in to fill an idle afternoon. Every stroke, every handprint, every figure painted in charcoal, ochre, or white clay seems to have been done with purpose. The question is, what purpose? The question is, what purpose? Archaeologists and anthropologists have long tried to answer this. Some believe these caves were sacred spaces reserved for ceremonies and rituals tied to hunting, fertility, or protection. The animals depicted, bison, horses, mammoths, lions, were the lifeblood of the people, providing food, tools, and clothing. To paint them on the walls might have been an act of calling them into being, of ensuring abundance in the seasons to come. Others suggest the caves were places of initiation, where young members of the group were brought to learn the old ways. Imagine a teenager stepping into this chamber for the first time, the torchlight flickering over the walls, the elders speaking softly about the spirits of the animals, about the stories written in pigment and stone. The paintings could have been lessons, guides to survival, or maps of the surrounding world. And then there's the idea that these images were not just about survival, but about connection to each other, to the earth, to something larger and unseen. The act of painting in the dark, deep within the belly of the earth, might have been a way of speaking to the spirit world, of leaving a message that could travel beyond the reach of ordinary life. You picture the artists at work. One grinds ochre into powder, mixing it with fat or water to make a rich red paint. Another shapes a torch, the flames casting moving shadows that seem to bring the painted animals to life. The hum of quiet voices fills the chamber, punctuated by the soft scratch of pigment on stone. There is focus here, but also reverence, as if the wall itself were alive and the artist's role was to reveal what was already hidden within it. Perhaps the placement of each animal had meaning too. A herd of horses galloping toward a narrow passage could mark the path toward another chamber, or symbolize the migration of the real herds in the world outside. A lone bison painted above head height might be a guardian, watching over all who enter. The abstract signs, dots, lines, zigzags, might be part of a language we no longer speak, a code meant only for those who belong to this world. Even the act of entering the cave might have been part of the ritual. Outside, the world is open, filled with light and movement. Inside, the passage narrows, the air cools, the light dims. Each step away from the surface is a step away from the ordinary. By the time you reach the painted chambers, you are in a different state of mind, more focused, more attuned to the sound of your own breath, more aware of the flicker of light and shadow. It's as if the journey into the cave was as important as the images themselves. Some researchers have studied the acoustics of these caves and found that certain spots have remarkable echoes and resonances. In those places, a voice or a drum beat carries differently, vibrating through the walls. And interestingly, many of those spots are near major paintings. Could it be that sound was part of the experience, that the paintings were not meant to be seen in silence, but accompanied by chanting, music, or the rhythmic pounding of feet? The thought sends a shiver through you. And then there's the role of fire. In the deep chambers, the only light came from torches and small fires. Firelight moves, it breathes. It makes the painted animals seem to move with it, their legs shifting, their bodies swaying. In that dancing glow, a bison could look like it's charging, a horse like it's tossing its head. Was this intentional? Did the artists paint with the flicker of light in mind, creating living scenes meant to be animated by flame? It's possible too that the rituals here were tied to moments in the year, the changing of seasons, the migration of herds, the turning of the stars overhead. The cave may have been visited only at certain times, each visit a part of a cycle that connected the people to the rhythms of nature. And yet, for all these theories, no one knows for sure. The truth is locked in time, as unreachable as the thoughts of the artists themselves. What remains are the paintings, the tools they left behind, and the echoes of their presence. You find yourself wondering whether the meaning was as important to them as the act. Perhaps it was the gathering together, the mixing of pigments, the shared labour, the moment of stepping back to see the finished animal glowing in the torchlight that mattered most. In that sense, the meaning of the cave might not be a single answer, but a tapestry woven from survival, from teaching, from belief, from beauty, a place where the practical and the spiritual met in the same breath. You take a slow breath yourself, feeling the stillness of the chamber. The walls seem to hum with memory. Somewhere in the quiet you can almost hear the soft murmur of voices, the crackle of a torch, the distant beat of a drum. You imagine standing here with them, not as a visitor from the future, but as someone who belongs, someone who understands the language of the animals on the walls, the rhythm of the rituals, the way the air feels just before the firelight reveals a new painting. When you turn to leave the chamber, you carry that sense with you, the knowledge that these images were not made to be looked at once and forgotten, but to be returned to again and again, just as the people did. Just as the wolf and the child once walked the clay floor, you feel you've stepped into something enduring, a quiet ceremony that began long before you arrived and will outlast you by thousands of years. Outside the cave, the world is bright and expansive, a sharp contrast to the quiet darkness beneath the earth. The people who painted those walls lived in a landscape that was both beautiful and demanding, rolling grasslands, thick forests and winding rivers, all under the vast arc of a sky untouched by modern lights. It was a place alive with movement, herds of bison grazing in the distance, reindeer migrating across the plains, mammoths lumbering slowly toward feeding grounds, and wolves pacing the edges of human encampments. These were Ice Age people, living in a time when glaciers still gripped much of the northern world. Winters were long and cold, summers brief and filled with frantic abundance. The artists were part of small, close-knit groups who travelled with the seasons, following game and gathering what the land offered. Survival was a shared effort. Every person, man, woman or child, had a role. Their homes above ground were temporary shelters, tents made from hides stretched over wooden poles, or lean-tos built against natural rock walls. In some seasons they might have used caves for living as well, though the deep sacred chambers like the one you visited were likely reserved for ritual. Inside the living shelters, hearths burned constantly. Fire was the heart of the home, a source of warmth, light and safety, and a place for cooking meals that brought everyone together. Daily life was physical, shaped by the rhythms of hunting, foraging and crafting. Men often hunted large animals in coordinated groups, using spears tipped with flint or bone points. Women and children gathered roots, berries, nuts and herbs, and sometimes trapped smaller animals or fished in rivers. These roles, however, weren't rigid. Skill mattered more than strict division, and everyone learned to contribute in multiple ways. The artists of the cave paintings were not separate from these tasks. They were hunters, gatherers, toolmakers and caretakers like the others. The act of painting was likely woven into their lives rather than standing apart from it. A person might spend the morning helping to butcher a reindeer, the afternoon chipping a new spear point, and the evening preparing pigments for a visit to the cave. Making paint required patience and knowledge. Minerals such as ochre and hematite provided red and yellow hues. Charcoal from burned wood offered black, white came from crushed calcite or clay. These materials had to be collected, often from far away. Stones were ground into fine powder, sometimes mixed with animal fat or plant sap to make a paste that would stick to stone. Brushes could be made from chewed sticks, bundles of plant fibers or tufts of animal hair, though many lines in the caves were drawn directly with fingers or blown through hollow bones to create soft-edged stencils. Clothing was crafted from animal hides, tanned and softened until supple, then sewn with sinew thread using bone needles. People wore layers to protect against the cold, tunics, leggings, cloaks and boots lined with fur. Ornaments made from shells, teeth and carved bones suggest that even in a world of survival there was room for beauty and personal expression. These details, a necklace, a decorated spear thrower, hint that art above ground was as valued as the art hidden in the caves. Social life revolved around the group. Stories were told around the fire, passing on knowledge of hunting grounds, weather patterns and animal behavior. Elders were keepers of memory, while children learned through play and imitation. Songs and rhythms may have been part of daily life, used to coordinate work, teach language, or simply pass the long winter nights. The natural world was not just a backdrop, but a living presence. The people understood the movements of animals, the cycles of plants, the shifting of seasons. They could read the sky for weather, the tracks in snow for prey, and the sounds of birds for approaching danger. This deep awareness of the environment shaped the way they lived and the way they made art. The animals painted in the caves were not distant curiosities, they were familiar, essential companions in survival. Above ground, the seasons dictated the pace. Spring brought migrations and new plant growth. Summer was a time of abundance, when food could be dried, smoked, or stored for the leaner months. Autumn meant preparation, repairing shelters, making new clothing, and hunting animals at their fattest before winter set in. Winter was the most challenging season, when survival depended on what had been gathered before and on the strength of the community. Yet even in winter there could be moments of joy. Children playing in snow, shared meals after a successful hunt, quiet evenings when the wind roared outside but the fire kept the cold at bay. It's easy to imagine that some of these moments, the camaraderie, the warmth, the shared humanity, were carried into the caves along with the pigments and torches. The journey from their daily world into the cave was a shift from the practical to the spiritual, but it was all part of the same life. Above ground, they lived by the rhythm of the earth. Below ground, they expressed that rhythm in images that have outlasted millennia. Standing in the open air after imagining the painted chambers, you can almost see them, a small group moving across the landscape, wrapped in fur cloaks against the wind, carrying bundles of sticks for torches and small pouches of pigment. They walk with purpose, their destination not a hunting ground or shelter, but the dark, echoing space where animals run forever on stone walls. Above ground, the artists were part of a fragile but resilient world. They depended on the land, on one another, and on the knowledge passed down through countless generations. And perhaps that is why their art still speaks to us, because it was made by people whose lives, though separated from ours by tens of thousands of years, were still shaped by the same needs for food, for warmth, for community, and for meaning. In their painted animals, we see the same impulse that drives us to create today, the desire to capture the fleeting, to honor what sustains us, and to leave a mark that says we were here. Above ground, their days may have been filled with the work of survival, but in the quiet of the cave they reached for something more, and found it in the meeting of firelight, stone, and the human hand. The moment you step into the heart of the cave, surrounded by the most vivid panels of ancient art, something shifts. It is not just the air, though it is cooler here, heavier and still, nor just the silence, though that too is deep and unbroken. It is the way the present seems to dissolve. The hum of modern life, the weight of clocks and schedules, all of it fades until only this place exists. Before you, the walls are alive with animals. Horses gallop in unison, their manes flowing, their bodies arched as if caught mid-stride. Bison lower their heads in a silent charge. Lions stalk in ochre and black, eyes fixed on prey that will never move, yet never die. Every figure is precise and intentional, yet full of motion, a paradox of stillness and life that pulls you into its rhythm. In the beam of a modern flashlight, the colors are startlingly fresh. The reds and yellows from iron oxide, the deep black from charcoal, have held their strength across millennia. Some lines are bold, sweeping strokes, others are delicate, almost trembling, as if the artist's breath slowed in concentration. Here and there you can see faint smudges, a handprint, a finger drag through wet pigment, tiny intimate traces of the person who stood where you now stand. The longer you look, the harder it becomes to feel the distance of time. You imagine the flicker of a torch in place of your flashlight, the smoke drifting toward the ceiling, the way the shadows must have danced across these same images 30,000 years ago. In that light, the animals would have seemed to move, muscles rippling, hooves pounding as if the wall itself were alive. There is an almost magnetic pull to the art. You can't simply glance and move on, your eyes return, tracing the lines again and again as if hoping to find something new. And you do. A faint engraving beneath the paint, a second head on a horse, suggesting an attempt to capture motion, layers upon layers built by different hands, maybe even across generations. You become aware of your own breath, slow and careful, not wanting to disturb the air that has hung here for so long. Every inhale carries the scent of stone, dust, and something older, the memory of smoke perhaps, or the mineral tang of water seeping through limestone. The cave's silence presses around you, broken only by the faint echo when you shift your weight or take a step. The scientists who have studied this place speak of its preservation in clinical terms: stable humidity, lack of light, controlled access. But standing here, it feels like something more deliberate, as if time itself has been holding its breath to keep these walls untouched. And in this stillness, you start to feel the presence of the people who made these images. They are not abstract ancestors now, but individuals. Someone mixed the pigment you're looking at, grinding stone into powder. Someone decided where the bison's shoulder should curve, where the lion's paw should fall. Someone stepped back, torch in hand, and judged the work complete. You are looking directly at their decisions, their skill, their vision, and it is as immediate as if they had finished yesterday. It is humbling and oddly comforting to realize that human hands have always sought to leave a mark, that this impulse to capture the world, to say, "I saw this, I felt this," runs like a thread from the Ice Age to now. The tools have changed, but the desire is the same. You lose track of how long you've been standing there. Without the cues of daylight, without the sound of passing time, your mind settles into a different rhythm. The paintings are not just images, they are a kind of presence, patient and enduring, asking nothing except that you truly see them. Perhaps this is why the cave feels like a threshold between worlds. On one side is the modern surface with its speed, noise and impermanence. On the other is a place where 30,000 years can collapse into a single breath. Here, you are neither past nor present. You are simply in the company of the moment, and the moment has no age. You imagine the artist stepping back to look at the wall, feeling the same quiet satisfaction you feel now in looking at it. Perhaps they also felt the strangeness of time in that instant, knowing the image would last long after they were gone, but not truly able to picture the people who would one day see it. Somewhere in the quiet, you realize that the cave is not a museum. It is not a frozen relic. It is still a living space, because every person who stands here becomes part of its story. The paintings are as much about you standing here now as they are about the bison or the horse. Time in this place is not a straight line but a circle, and you are standing on its edge. When you finally turn away from the wall, the feeling lingers, the air seems thicker, the silence deeper. It's as if the cave has whispered something you can't quite translate, not words but a sensation, a reminder that time is not as rigid as we think, and that some moments when held with enough care can last forever. If the ancient artists could step into the cave today, they might be astonished not just by the passage of 30 millennia, but by the quiet vigilance that surrounds their work. Few human creations are guarded with such patience, such absolute care. This is no tourist site with velvet ropes and ticket stubs. It is a sealed world entrusted to a small circle of people who dedicate their careers to ensuring it remains unchanged. The entrance, once a natural threshold hidden by rock and vegetation, is now a controlled gateway. Heavy, climate-sealed doors keep the inner air isolated from the modern world. Before anyone enters, they must pass through a series of protocols: protective clothing to keep fibers and skin oils away from the art, masks to prevent the introduction of new microorganisms, and strict time limits to reduce even the smallest disturbance. The scientists who work here often describe the cave as a patient in their care. Every aspect of its health is monitored: the humidity, the temperature, the carbon dioxide levels, the growth of fungi or bacteria on the walls. Sensors embedded discreetly in the rock send back constant data, creating a living chart of the cave's condition. A shift of even half a degree, a small change in moisture, is enough to trigger investigation. It wasn't always like this. In the early years after the cave's discovery, more people entered. Curiosity was high, and the pressure to allow public access was strong. But the story of other caves, where exposure to human breath, light and microbes had caused irreparable damage, was a warning. In some sites, green algae now blooms over ancient paintings. In others, a thin white fungus spreads across once pristine walls. Here, that fate would not be risked. So the decision was made: Chauvet, like Lascaux after it, would be closed to the public. Only researchers, conservators, and a few carefully chosen visitors would ever see the paintings in person. For everyone else, a replica would be built above ground, a painstaking recreation where the art could be admired without endangering the original. This choice was not without controversy. Some argued that art, especially art made by early humans, belongs to all of humanity and should be seen by as many as possible. Others countered that the responsibility to protect outweighed the right to see it firsthand. In the end, the cave's guardians stood firm. Their work is not about satisfying curiosity, it is about ensuring survival. A conservator once said that her job is to protect silence. She meant not only the physical stillness of the cave, but the unbroken continuity of its story. The moment too many feet walk here, too many breaths fill the air, that silence will be broken, and what has endured for 30,000 years could begin to fade. The team is small, but their dedication is immense. Some are archaeologists still piecing together the human history of the paintings. Others are chemists and biologists studying the pigments, the rock composition, and the microscopic life that shares the cave with the art. A few are engineers maintaining the delicate balance of the sealed environment. Each has their own specialty, but all share a deep sense of responsibility. Their visits are never hurried. When they enter, it is with a kind of ritual calm, their voices low, their movements measured. They carry their tools with care, sometimes kneeling close to the wall to examine a detail with a magnifying lens, sometimes scanning the surface with non-invasive instruments that can reveal what lies beneath the visible paint. There is no rush here, only the slow, deliberate pace of work done with respect. It is a strange relationship. They must love the cave, but never touch it. They must know every detail of the paintings, yet leave them exactly as they are. Their work is as much about restraint as it is about action. And always there is the awareness that they are only the latest in a long chain of protectors. Before them, it was the rockfall that sealed the entrance for thousands of years, keeping out the wind and rain. Before that, perhaps it was the choices of the artists themselves, painting deep in the cave where sunlight could never reach, where the art would be hidden except to those willing to make the journey. In some ways, the modern protectors are part of the artwork now. Their presence is invisible but essential, like the hidden layers of pigment beneath the surface. Without them, the bison, the horses, the lions would face the slow erosion of time, the inevitable encroachment of decay. With them, the paintings remain as close to eternal as human hands can make them. The replica above ground has become a bridge between worlds. Here, the public can walk among perfectly reproduced panels, feel the curve of the walls, and see the animals in the same scale and detail as in the original. It is not the same. The air does not carry the weight of ancient stillness. The silence is not as deep, but it is enough to share the vision without risking the source. Some visitors leave the replica disappointed, saying it is only an imitation. Others leave moved to tears, realizing that the art's survival depends on their not seeing the real thing. The protectors understand both reactions. They live with that paradox every day. At night, when the last visitor leaves the replica and the real cave lies untouched beneath the hills, the guardians rest knowing they have done their part. They will never own the paintings, never change them, never add to them. They are here to make sure the moment you stand before them, whether in a century or 1,000 years, will be exactly as it is now. And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing. In a world where so much is consumed, altered, and remade, the choice here is to do nothing, to hold still, to let the art simply exist. In the quiet of the sealed cave, 30,000 years of time remain suspended, guarded by those who understand that sometimes the greatest gift we can give the past is to leave it untouched. There is a moment in every visit to the cave, whether you are a scientist, a conservator, or one of the rare few allowed inside, when the art stops being simply ancient paintings and begins to feel like a conversation. The walls speak, not in words but in curves and lines, in the gaze of an animal or the sweep of a stroke. It is as if the people who made them reached through time across the gulf of 30,000 years to say, "We were here, we saw the world, we dreamed." Why do humans make art? The question hangs in the air like torch smoke. The answers are as varied as the people who attempt them. Some say it was spiritual, a way to call the animals into being, to honor them, or to ask for luck in the hunt. Others believe it was a form of teaching, a visual language to pass down knowledge about the creatures that shared their land. And some think it was simply an expression of beauty, a desire to make the dark walls sing with light and form. But as you look at the cave's panels, the bison with tense muscles, the horses in mid-gallop, the mammoths standing like quiet mountains, it is hard not to feel that something deeper is at work. This is not just communication, it is connection. The artists were not painting from photographs or from imagination alone. They were painting from life, from memory, from the rhythms of the world around them. They had watched the herds move, seen the way a lion's head turns just before it leaps, noticed the play of shadows across a flank at dusk. Art like this requires intimacy. To paint an animal well, you must understand it, not only its shape but its spirit. You must have stood close enough to hear its breathing, to watch its eyes. And in that closeness lies something profound, respect. These were not casual doodles or idle decorations. They were deliberate acts of seeing and remembering. Some anthropologists have suggested that the cave walls were more than mere surfaces, that in the minds of the artists they were thresholds. The undulations of the rock became the muscles of an animal. The curves of a ridge became the rise of a back. When firelight moved across them, the animals seemed to stir, to live again for a moment in that flickering glow. In this way, the cave was not just a gallery, it was a stage, and the paintings were part of a living performance. The idea of performance in the deep darkness has fascinated researchers. Imagine a small group gathered around, their faces lit by the trembling flames, watching as the artist draws the final line on the wall. Perhaps there was music, a low chant, the beat of hands against hollow stone. Perhaps there was silence broken only by the soft rasp of charcoal or the sigh of breath. Whatever the ritual, it must have been powerful, enough to carry these images through millennia. Art also serves another purpose. It fixes memory in place. Long before humans had writing, we had pictures. A painted animal could remind the viewer of its size, its habits, the seasons when it was plentiful. In a world without books, these walls might have been an encyclopedia as much as a dreamscape. And yet, the dreams are undeniable. There is no purely practical reason to add the fine details some of these artists did. The subtle shading of a bison's fur, the suggestion of movement in a horse's mane. These touches are for the heart, not the hunt. They are for the human need to make beauty, to create something that outlasts us. We might never know exactly what the people of Chauvet were thinking as they painted, but we do know what it feels like to stand before their work now. It feels like stepping into someone else's dream, a dream that has been waiting, patient and untouched for you to arrive. Perhaps that is why the cave's art has such power. It is not merely old, it is alive in the way that only dreams can be. Dreams belong to no single moment. They are timeless, and they reach into the places in us that language cannot. Standing here, you realize that these artists were not so different from you. They felt awe, they felt fear, they felt the pull of the unknown and the urge to make it visible. In that sense, the cave is less a relic of the past than a mirror. When you gaze at the bison, you are also seeing the humans who stood where you stand, seeing what you see. The gap between you, all those centuries shrinks until it feels as though you could touch their hands. Modern art, for all its complexity and variety, still springs from the same root. We make images because we want to remember, because we want to feel, because we want to be seen. Whether it is paint on stone, pigment on canvas, or pixels on a screen, the impulse is the same, and the cave reminds us that this impulse is one of our oldest truths. As you prepare to leave this chamber, the animals seem to follow you with their eyes. Not accusingly, not even pleadingly, but as if they know you will carry them with you. Perhaps that is the final purpose of this art, to plant itself in the mind, to become part of the viewer's own inner landscape. In that way, the dream continues, passed from one human to another across generations. And as you step toward the narrow passage that will lead you to the last part of the cave, you find yourself thinking not only about the people who made these images, but about those who will see them in another 30,000 years, if there is anyone left to see them. Will they understand us any better than we understand the artists of Chauvet? Will they feel the same mixture of wonder and longing? You cannot know, but you suspect the answer will be yes. For as long as there are humans, there will be dreams on walls, and as long as there are dreams, there will be those who walk in darkness to find them. The final passage rises gently, its walls narrowing as though the cave is reluctant to let you go. You move slowly, feeling the air change with every step. The damp, mineral scent of the depths gives way to the faint sweetness of leaves and sunlight. Somewhere ahead there is a hint of warmth. Behind you the chambers of painted animals and ancient dreams fall silent again. They have been here for 30,000 years without you, and they will wait as long as they must for the next visitor. You carry the weight of their presence now, not heavy but steady like a stone in the palm of your hand. The slope steepens, and then you see it, the thin ribbon of daylight spilling across the rock. It is bright after so much darkness, and you pause just before stepping into it. The light feels like a curtain, and beyond it is the modern world with its noise, its speed, its distractions. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the warm air of the valley. The vines around the cave mouth sway gently in the breeze, hiding again the entrance you just emerged from, as if erasing your passage back into the present. Birds call from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, water moves over stones. The contrast is striking. Only moments ago you stood before silent mammoths and flickering lions, feeling the ancient breath of firelight on stone. Now the sky is open and endless, the sun pouring gold across the hills. But in a way the cave is still with you. Every image, every curve of the walls, Every echo remains stored in your mind like a secret you are now responsible for keeping. As you walk away from the entrance, you glance back one last time. The cave gives nothing away from the outside. It is just another shadow in the rock. And yet you know what lies within, a gallery of dreams, untouched by centuries, waiting in the dark. Perhaps that is the truest magic of the Cave of Forgotten Dreams. It reminds you that beauty and meaning can survive the longest stretches of time, hidden away until the right eyes find them again. It teaches you that even in the most silent places, human voices can endure, not in speech, but in images, in symbols, in the marks left by hands that reached out across time. The valley spreads out before you now, green and open under the afternoon sun. You walk slowly, still breathing with the rhythm of the cave, unhurried, mindful, listening for echoes. The world feels different after the darkness, sharper and softer all at once. And as you leave the valley, the thought comes quietly. The cave has not been forgotten at all. It has simply been waiting. And now, so will you, carrying its memory like a lantern you can light whenever you close your eyes.